The West was a canvas of dust and blood, a place where life was cheap and water was worth more than gold. For Abigail, cowering on the scorching shingles of her own burning home, it was the end of everything. Below, the men who had just murdered her husband searched for her, their laughter like the cackle of coyotes. In her arms, a baby whimpered his small life, a flickering candle in a hurricane. Then a shadow fell over her, a man silent as the grave stood on the roof's peak. He wasn't a townsman nor a rancher. He was Apache, and as his dark eyes found the child, he spoke not with menace, but with a chilling, heart-breaking accusation. "You're late." The heat was a physical blow. It pressed down from the relentless Arizona sun and radiated up from the cedar shingles, threatening to cook Abigail where she lay. Smoke, thick and acrid, clawed at her throat, a constant reminder of the inferno consuming the life she and Silas had built. Every crackle of burning pine, every groan of a collapsing beam was a fresh stab of terror. Below in the yard, trampled by heavy boots and shod horses, she could hear them. The voices of Bartholomew Kane's men, led by his cruel foreman, Finn. She can't have gone far with the brat. Finn's voice was a gravelly rasp. Kane wants the woman silenced and the land cleared by sundown. Find her. Abigail pressed herself flatter against the roof's pitch, pulling the thin blanket tighter around the infant cradled against her chest. Little Leo, bless his innocent heart, had finally cried himself into an exhausted slumber. His small, warm weight was both her only comfort and her greatest liability. She had scrambled up the trellis at the back of the house the moment the first gunshot echoed the one that had stolen Silas from her. She'd watched in horror from the cover of the chimney as they dragged his body toward the barn. They hadn't even bothered to be discreet. This wasn't a robbery. It was an execution, an erasure. Kane wanted their land. Everyone in the Crimson Ridge territory knew it. He'd made offers then, threats. The deep-dug well that Silas had labored over for a year had struck not just water, but a year-round spring. In this parched land, such a thing was a kingdom. Silas had refused to sell. This water is Leo's future abbey. He'd set his face, proud and stubborn. It's life. We don't sell life. Now he was dead, and that very life was being burned to the ground. A wave of dizziness washed over her. The sun, the smoke, the dehydration, it was all blurring the edges of her world. A loose shingle scraped under her boot as she shifted, and the sound was like a thunderclap in the tense silence. Down below, the voices stopped. What was that? A man grunted. "Up there. On the roof." Finn yelled. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Abigail. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. There was nowhere left to run. She squeezed her eyes shut, clutching Leo so tightly he stirred, and let out a soft whimper. She offered a silent prayer not for herself, but for the child. Let him be spared. Let some miracle find him. That's when the shadow fell. It wasn't from a cloud. It was solid, defined, and utterly silent. Her eyes snapped open. Standing on the apex of the roof, balanced as effortlessly as a hawk on a wire, was a man. He was tall and lean, clad in buckskin trousers and a simple cotton shirt that did little to hide the sinewy strength of his frame. His black hair was long held back from his face by a leather band. His skin was the color of the baked desert earth, and his features were sharp, angular, and unreadable. He carried no rifle, only a knife sheathed at his hip. He was Apache, a ghost from the hills, the kind of man parents use to frighten their children into behaving. Fear warred with a strange, desperate hope. Was he here to finish the job, to scalp her and the baby for a bounty, or was he the miracle she'd just prayed for? The men below had seen him too. A collective startled curse went up. Where in blazes did he come from? Shoot him! Shoot the savage! Finn bellowed his voice, cracking with fury and surprise. The Apache man didn't even glance down. His gaze was fixed on Abigail, and it was an unnerving, intense stare that seemed to see right through her terror into the very marrow of her bones. His eyes, dark and deep, dropped from her face to the swaddled bundle in her arms. A flicker of something pain-anger, a deep and profound sorrow crossed his face for a heartbeat so fleeting she might have imagined it. He took a step down the pitch of the roof, then another, his worn moccasins making no sound. He moved with a liquid grace that defied the treacherous heated surface. He stopped just a few feet from her, close enough that she could see the fine lines of dust etched around his eyes. He knelt, bringing them face to face. Abigail flinched, expecting a blade or a blow. Instead, he just looked at her. His expression, a mask of hardened control. A rifle shot cracked from below the bullet, whining past his head and splintering the chimney bricks. He didn't flinch. It was as if the world below the men, the guns, the fire simply didn't exist. There was only this space on the roof, this bubble of impossible stillness. He finally spoke. His voice was low, a quiet rumble that was somehow more commanding than Finn's bellowing. It was laced with an accent she couldn't place, but the English was clear, stark, and utterly devastating. He looked from her gaunt, smoke-stained face to the whimpering baby, his son. And he said the words that shattered what was left of her reality. "You're late." The words hung in the scorching air, nonsensical and terrifying. Late for what, her own death. The world had ceased to make sense. A bullet ricocheted off the chimney closer this time, showering them with brick dust. The Apache, whose name she didn't know, whose presence was an impossibility, acted as if he were merely brushing a fly from his shoulder. His focus was absolute, centered on her and the child. "Give him to me," he said, his voice flat, an order disguised as a request. Abigail's arms tightened instinctively around Leo. "No, who are you? What do you want to keep him alive?" the man replied, his gaze sharp and impatient. "Something you will fail to do in the next minute if you stay here." Another shot. This one tore through the shingles, just inches from Abigail's leg. She cried out a raw sound of pure fear. The Apache moved with blinding speed. In one fluid motion, he closed the distance between them, his hand gently but irresistibly closing over hers, the ones clutching the blanket around Leo. His touch wasn't brutal, but it was unyielding. "His name is Leo," the man said, and the sound of the name on his lips sent a fresh shockwave through her. How could he know she and Silas had chosen it together, whispered it to the sleeping infant in the quiet of the night? No one else knew. "How?" she began, but he cut her off. "There will be time for questions if we live. There will be only silence if we do not. Now give him to me." He didn't wait for her consent. His fingers deftly loosened her grip, and he lifted the baby from her arms. He held Leo with a surprising tenderness, cradling the infant's head in the crook of his arm, and pulling the blanket securely around him. For a moment he looked down at the child's sleeping face, and his stoic mask cracked again, revealing a chasm of raw emotion. It was the look of a man staring at a ghost, a miracle, and a wound all at once. "Stay behind me," he ordered, turning his back to her and facing the edge of the roof. The fire was climbing the walls now, and the smoke was a suffocating shroud. Below, Finn was screaming orders. "He's on the north side circle around. Don't let them get away." The Apache man paid them no heed. He crept to the edge, peering down. It was a sheer 12-foot drop to the parched ground. For a woman weak with fear and exhaustion, it was a death sentence. For him, it seemed a minor inconvenience. He slung a coil of thin, strong-looking rope from his shoulder, a rope she hadn't even noticed, and with a few deft movements secured it around the base of the sturdy brick chimney. He turned back to her. "Come." Abigail was frozen, her mind a maelstrom of confusion and terror. Who was this man? This phantom who appeared on her roof, knew her son's name, and looked at him with the eyes of a grieving father. "I can't," she stammered, the smoke making her cough violently. "I can't." He moved back to her side, his patience wearing thin. "You can and you will." He grabbed her arm, his grip like iron. He pulled her to her feet, forcing her to the edge of the roof where the rope dangled. "You will go down this rope. Do not look down. Do not stop until your feet touch the earth. I will follow with the boy. Go. Now." The urgency in his voice finally broke through her paralysis. The alternative was to burn or be shot. She took the rough rope in her hands, the fibers biting into her soft palms. She swung her legs over the edge, her worn dress catching on a nail. With a sob, she began her clumsy descent, scraping her knees and elbows against the rough-hewn timber of the wall. Gunshots erupted from the side of the house as Finn's men rounded the corner. Bullets thudded into the wall around her, sending splinters flying. She cried out her descent, hastening into a controlled fall. Her feet hit the ground hard, jarring her teeth, and she crumpled into a heap, gasping for air. She looked up just in time to see the most extraordinary thing. The Apache man, holding Leo securely against his chest with one arm, grasped the rope with the other, and simply walked down the side of the house, his feet finding purchase where there seemed to be none. He moved with the same impossible grace he'd shown on the roof landing, as silently as a cat beside her. He didn't pause. He pulled her to her feet. This way. Quickly. He led her away from the burning house, not towards the open plains, but towards the jagged rocky outcropping that bordered the eastern edge of their property, the one everyone called the Devil's Backbone. It was a place of twisted rock and thorny scrub considered impassable. Finn's voice rose in a triumphant shout from the other side of the inferno. "There they are after them. Don't let that redskin get away with the child they ran." Abigail stumbled her lungs, burning her legs weak. The Apache moved with a steady ground-eating pace, half dragging her along. He still held Leo, who had started to cry from the jostling and the noise. The man murmured something to the baby, a soft, low sound in a language she didn't understand, and miraculously Leo quieted. They reached the edge of the rocks, a seemingly solid wall of granite and shale. But the man didn't slow down. He veered left towards a dense thicket of mesquite that looked too thick for a snake to crawl through. He pushed aside a curtain of thorny branches to reveal a dark, narrow opening, a fissure in the rock barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. He pushed her inside. "Go. Keep moving." The passage was dark and cool. It smelled of damp earth and stone. It was a welcome relief from the fire and the sun. Abigail shuffled forward, her hands trailing against the rough rock walls. Behind her, the Apache followed the crying of the baby, now muffled by the stone. As they moved deeper, the sounds of the pursuit, the shouting and the gunshots grew fainter and fainter, until at last they were swallowed by the profound silence of the rock. They were safe for now, trapped in the dark belly of the earth, with a strange, silent man who held her son as if he belonged to him, who had appeared from nowhere and saved them all while accusing her of being late. The questions burned in Abigail's mind, hotter than the fire they'd just escaped. The darkness inside the passage was absolute. For long minutes, the only sounds were Abigail's ragged breaths and the soft shuffling of the Apache's moccasins on the stone floor behind her. The air grew cooler, the scent of dust replaced by a clean, mineral smell. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes so narrow she had to turn sideways, her shoulders scraping the rock. She had lived on this land for 2 years, and never known this place existed. Finally, a faint grey light appeared ahead. It grew brighter, and the passage opened into a small hidden box canyon no larger than the main room of her burned-down house. It was a secret place, walled on all sides by sheer cliffs of red rock. A trickle of water, the source of which was hidden in the shadows, ran down one wall, nurturing a patch of shockingly green ferns and a lone, hardy cottonwood tree. It was a pocket of life, hidden in the heart of the stone. The Apache moved past her and went straight to the small pool of water collected at the base of the ferns. He laid Leo down gently on a bed of soft moss, then dipped a strip of cloth torn from his own shirt into the water. He squeezed it out and carefully, tenderly wiped the soot and grime from the baby's face. The gesture was so paternal, so full of gentle care, that it sent a fresh pang of confusion and fear through Abigail. She finally found her voice, though it came out as a cracked whisper. "Who are you?" He didn't look at her. His attention remained on the child. "My name is Kaylin." The name meant nothing to her. "How did you know my son's name? Why were you there? What did you mean?" "Late." Kaylin finished his task and stood up, turning to face her. In the soft, diffused light of the hidden canyon, she could see his face clearly for the first time. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps not much older than her own 23 years. His face was etched with lines of hardship, but it was his eyes that held her. They were old eyes, filled with a sorrow so deep it seemed ancient. "I was not there for you," he said, his voice quiet but direct, leaving no room for misunderstanding. "I was there for my son." Abigail felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "Your son Leo is my son, mine and Silas." A bitter, humorless smile touched Kaylin's lips. Silas was many things. A good liar was one of them. Leo is not his. "You're insane," she breathed, shaking her head, backing away until her back hit the cold canyon wall. "You're a madman. You're lying." But even as she said the words, a seed of doubt began to sprout. The way he held the baby, the way he knew his name, the raw, possessive grief in his eyes. Kaylin reached inside his shirt and pulled out a small, intricately beaded amulet on a leather thong. It was shaped like a hawk in flight. He knelt beside the now sleeping Leo and gently untucked the blanket near the baby's neck. Tucked inside the collar of Leo's small gown was an identical amulet, only smaller. She promised she would never take it off him, Kaylin murmured, his voice thick with emotion. She promised he would wear it, so that I would know him. Abigail stared at the two amulets, her mind reeling. She had found that tiny beaded hawk on Leo the morning after he was born. She had assumed it was just a trinket, a good luck charm left by the midwife. She'd never given it a second thought. Abigail's voice was barely audible. "Who is she?" Kaylin looked up, and the pain in his eyes was a physical force. "Your sister Sarah." The world tilted and went grey. Abigail slid down the rock wall, her legs giving out from under her. Sarah, her younger sister. Beautiful, wild, impetuous Sarah, who had died of a fever a year ago, just a week after Leo was born. "No," she whispered, the denial, a reflex. "That's impossible." "Sarah, she was never... she would..." Kaylin said, his voice softening slightly at the sight of her distress. "And she did. We were to be married. In my ways, we were married. Her father, your father, found out. He would not have his daughter wed to an Apache. He called me a savage, a heathen. He locked her away. He and Silas Cook arranged a marriage for her to a man she despised, a business partner from Sterling Creek. The pieces began to fall into place, each one a shard of glass in Abigail's heart. She remembered Sarah's last few months, her sudden melancholy, the way she'd refused to see anyone. The family had said she was suffering from a woman's ailment, a touch of hysteria. Abigail had been newly married to Silas and living on the homestead, too wrapped up in her own life to see the truth. When she found she was with child, my child, she was terrified. Caelan continued his voice, a low threnody of grief. They would have taken the baby from her. So she made a plan. With you. Abigail looked at him, uncomprehending. With me, I knew nothing of this. You had just lost your own child, Caelan said softly, and the words were a fresh stab of pain, reopening a wound Abigail thought had scarred over. She had given birth to a stillborn daughter just 2 months before Leo was born. The grief had nearly broken her. Sarah knew you were desperate for a child. She came to you to Silas with a proposition. She would give you her baby. You would raise him as your own, and no one would ever know. Silas would be seen as a man with an heir, and her shame would be hidden forever. It was monstrous. It was unbelievable. And yet it explained everything. It explained why Silas had been so secretive about the birth, insisting they use an old midwife from a distant town instead of Dr. Albright from Crimson Ridge. It explained why he'd never let her talk about the details of Leo's arrival, always shushing her with a gruff, "What's past is past, woman." She had thought it was his way of protecting her from the memory of their own lost baby. Now she saw it was to protect his lie. She told me he was an orphan, Abigail whispered, her voice trembling. A baby from a poor family on the east side of the territory, whose parents had died of cholera. She said she had arranged it through the church, a secret adoption, so I wouldn't have to face the pity of the town. Silas was a clever man, Caelan said, his voice laced with contempt. He took my son and passed him off as his own. He took your grief and used it to build his lie. And Sarah, she agreed to it, because she saw no other way to ensure her son would be safe and loved. But why were you here tonight? Abigail asked, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Tonight was the night, Caelan said, his eyes distant. Sarah and I had a plan. Her forced marriage was a sham. She was to feign illness, to waste away, until her husband tired of her. It took a year. Tonight I was coming for her, to take her and our son away from this place, to start a new life in the mountains. I was coming to get my family. He looked from the baby to Abigail, his face a mask of bitter irony. I found this instead. I was too late to save her, but I am not too late to save him. He paused, his gaze hardening. You said Silas told you this land, this water was Leo's future. He was telling the truth. He discovered the spring after you were settled here. But he also knew that Cain wanted this land. I believe Silas was using the truth about Leo's parentage, about my son, to blackmail Cain. Abigail's blood ran cold. Blackmail Cain. How Bartholomew Cain was not just your father's business partner. He was the man your father arranged for Sarah to marry. He was the man she was running from. The revelation struck Abigail with the force of a physical blow. Bartholomew Cain, the cruel, wealthy rancher who saw people as pawns and land as a prize. The man who had just murdered her husband. He was the one Sarah had been betrothed to against her will. The entire web of deceit was more intricate and venomous than she could ever have imagined. So Silas knew, Abigail said, her voice hollow, as she processed the enormity of the betrayal. He knew Cain was the intended husband, and he knew Leo was your son. He used that. He used a child, his own supposed son, as a weapon against Cain. It is the only thing that makes sense. Caelan said, his eyes fixed on the distant cliffs, as if he could see the ghosts of the past playing out against them. Cain is a proud man. The thought of a child he was meant to father being born to an Apache would be an unbearable stain on his honor. He would pay anything to keep it secret. But Silas grew too greedy, or Cain grew tired of being bled. So he decided to erase the problem. He killed Silas, and he meant to kill you and the child, burying the secret forever under the ashes of your home. Abigail wrapped her arms around herself, a sudden chill running through her despite the canyon's mild air. She thought back over the past year. Silas had been different, more confident, almost arrogant. He'd bought new livestock, a new wagon, things she'd thought they couldn't afford. He'd deflected her questions with a smug wave of his hand. He hadn't been a good husband, not really. He was often distant, sometimes cruel in his coldness, but he had provided for her. He had given her Leo. Or rather, he had been the vessel for Sarah's desperate gift. Her thoughts turned to her sister. She saw Sarah not as the cheerful girl she'd grown up with, but as a trapped, terrified young woman. Abigail's memory dredged up a specific painful incident she had long since buried. She had visited her family home a few weeks before Sarah's death. Her sister had been frail, a pale shadow of her former self, confined to her room. Abby Sarah had whispered, her hand gripping Abigail's with a surprising strength. "Promise me something. Promise me you'll love him. Love him enough for both of us. Protect him. No matter what." At the time, Abigail had thought Sarah was talking about Silas trying to mend the rift she knew existed between the couple. "I'll try Sarah," she had replied, confused. Not him, Sarah had insisted, her eyes wild with a feverish intensity. "The boy promised me, Abby. Swear it on my life. I swear it," Sarah Abigail had said simply to soothe her. A week later, Sarah was dead. The doctor had called it a wasting fever, a result of her own melancholy. Now Abigail knew it was the fever of a broken heart. Sarah hadn't been speaking of Silas. She had been speaking of her son Leo, and she had been saying goodbye. The tears she hadn't been able to shed amidst the terror and the fire now came hot and silent. They streamed down her soot-stained cheeks. Tears for her sister's stolen life, for the baby who had lost two mothers, for the lies that had held her own life together, and had now shattered it completely. Caelan watched her, his expression unreadable. He made no move to comfort her. He simply stood as a silent witness to her grief. He had his own, a grief a year old, fresh as the morning's kill. After a long while, her sobs subsided into shuddering breaths. She looked over at Leo, still sleeping peacefully on the mossy ground, oblivious to the storm of truth and lies that surrounded his existence. He had her sister's dark, curling hair. How had she never seen that before? He had Caelan's strong brow and the same quiet intensity in his gaze when he was awake. He was a perfect fusion of the two people, a living, breathing secret she had unknowingly nurtured. "What was she like?" Abigail asked, her voice raspy. "With you," Caelan's gaze softened as he looked into the past. "She was like the river in spring," he said, the words coming slowly, carefully chosen, full of life, unafraid of the rocks in her path. She saw no difference between my skin and hers. She saw only a heart. She learned my people's stories. She walked the mountains with me. She was not afraid of the world, only of the men who tried to cage her. He spoke of a Sarah she barely knew, a woman of passion and courage, so different from the quiet, dutiful sister she remembered. Abigail realized she had never truly known her sister at all. Their father's strict, unyielding nature had forced them both into molds, and Sarah had secretly dared to break hers. We were going to go west, Kaelin continued, his voice barely a whisper. To the lands beyond the territories, where a man's name is his own, not his father's. Where a family is built on love, not on contracts and land deeds. He looked at Abigail, his eyes clear and hard. That life was stolen from me, but my son will not be. He is all I have left of her. The air in the canyon grew heavy with unspoken questions. What now? He had saved them, yes. But he had also laid claim to the only thing she had left in the world. Leah was not hers. He had never been hers. She was his aunt, a caretaker, a lie. But her heart didn't know that. Her heart had bonded with the helpless infant she had nursed, rocked to sleep, and loved as her own. "What are you going to do?" she asked, the words catching in her throat. "I am going to keep him safe," Kaelin answered simply. "Cain will not stop hunting. He knows the child lives. As long as Leo draws breath, Cain's secret is at risk. He will tear this territory apart to find him. Where can we go? He has men everywhere. We have nothing." "You have nothing," Kaelin corrected her, not unkindly. "I have these mountains. They are my home. They will hide us, but we cannot stay here forever. A child needs more than rocks and roots. He needs a future, the one his mother wanted for him." He paused, his gaze meeting hers, and for the first time she saw not a rival or a claimant, but a potential unwilling ally. Silas may have been a liar and a blackmailer, but he was not a fool. If he was extorting a man as dangerous as Cain, he would have kept proof. Something to guarantee his own safety. An insurance. We need to find it. Abigail stared at him, aghast. "Go back there. They'll kill us on sight." "They will not be looking for us to come back," Kaelin said. "They will be looking for us in the hills on the roads. They expect us to run. We will do what they do not expect. We will go back. Not to the house, to the town, to wherever a man like Silas would hide a secret he valued more than his life." The thought was terrifying, but as she looked at Leo's sleeping form, a fierce, protective instinct, the one Sarah had counted on, rose within her. He may not have been born of her body, but he was the child of her heart, the legacy of her sister. She had sworn an oath. Protect him, no matter what. "All right," she said, her voice finding a new, unfamiliar strength. "Tell me what we need to do." The plan Kaelin laid out was one of audacious simplicity. They would not flee north into the mountains or south toward the border, the two most logical escape routes. Instead, they would cut west, moving under the cover of darkness, and circle back towards the town of Crimson Ridge. Cain's patrols would be thick on the main trails, hunting for a frantic woman and a crying baby. They would not be looking for two silent shadows slipping through the ravines and arroyos. Their destination was the office of the town doctor, a man Abigail knew well, Dr. Alistair Albright. "Why him?" Abigail asked as they prepared to leave the sanctuary of the canyon. The sun was setting, painting the cliffs in hues of orange and purple. Kaelin had fashioned a sling for Leo from a large piece of buckskin, strapping the baby securely to his own chest. "A man like Silas needs a safe place for his secrets," Kaelin explained, testing the knots on the sling. "A bank vault is too obvious. Cain could have it seized. Hiding it at the homestead was too risky, as we have seen. But a doctor is a man of confidence. He holds the secrets of the entire town. His office is a place of trust, and Silas was his patient." Abigail considered it. Dr. Albright was an old, respected man, known for his discretion and his slightly cantankerous demeanor. He had been the town physician for 30 years. He had delivered Abigail and Sarah. He had treated Silas for a broken arm a few months ago. It was plausible. Silas, ever the opportunist, might have seen the doctor's unimpeachable reputation as the perfect cover. What if there's nothing there? She pressed her anxiety a knot in her stomach. What if this proof of yours doesn't even exist? It exists, Kaelin said with certainty. A coward always saves his own skin first. Silas would not have confronted Cain without a weapon to hold over his head. We are looking for letters, documents, anything that ties Cain to Sarah's betrothal and proves Silas knew about it. Their journey began as the last sliver of sun vanished behind the western peaks. Kaelin moved with a silent, ghostly purpose, and Abigail struggled to keep up. He taught her how to step heel to toe, to minimize sound, how to use the shadows of rocks and cacti for cover. He seemed to know the land as if it were an extension of his own body, navigating the treacherous, trackless terrain with an unerring sense of direction. They paused only once when Leo began to fret. Kaelin found a sheltered overhang, and Abigail nursed the baby while Kaelin stood watch, a motionless silhouette against the star-dusted sky. The intimacy of the moment was strange and unsettling. Here they were, two people from different worlds, bound by their love for this one small child. She was the nurturer, he was the protector. They were a fractured, impossible family, forged in fire and lies. "He has your eyes," she found herself saying quietly into the darkness. Kaelin turned his head slightly. "He has her spirit. I pray he does." They continued on the silence between them, filled with the weight of their shared purpose. Abigail found her fear slowly being replaced by a hard, cold resolve. She was no longer just a victim fleeing for her life. She was a woman with a mission, driven by the need to protect her sister's child and to see justice done for the man who had destroyed their family. She was learning that grief could be a fuel, and that fear, when honed, could become a weapon. They reached the outskirts of Crimson Ridge just before dawn. The town was a collection of dusty streets and false-fronted buildings, sleeping under a blanket of pre-dawn mist. Kaelin led them to a livery stable at the edge of town, slipping through a broken board in the back wall. The air was warm and smelled of hay and horses. "We wait here until the doctor opens his surgery," Kaelin whispered, settling them in an empty stall. "The office is at the end of the main street next to the assayers. I will go. You will stay here with the child. It is too dangerous for you to be seen." "No," Abigail said, surprising herself with her own firmness. "Dr. Albright knows me. He has known me my whole life. He will be suspicious of you. If anyone is going to get him to open up his files, it will be me. I will tell him Silas left a package for me in his care. He'll believe me before he believes a stranger." Kaelin studied her in the dim light, his dark eyes assessing her. He saw not the terrified woman from the rooftop, but someone new. Someone with steel in her spine. You would be walking into a town full of Cain's men. They will be looking for a woman in rags, running scared. They won't be looking for a widow, calmly walking down the main street to see her doctor. She took a deep breath. "It's the better plan, the only plan." He gave a slow, reluctant nod. "The risk is great. The reward is his life," she said, glancing down at Leo, who was stirring in Kaelin's arms. "It's a risk I have to take. For Sarah." As the town began to wake, a plan was finalized. Abigail would borrow a dark shawl from a clothesline to cover her singed dress. She would approach the doctor's office as soon as he arrived. Kaelin would position himself across the street in the alleyway between the saloon and the blacksmith, close enough to intervene if things went wrong. The moment came. The sun was up now, and the street was beginning to fill with wagons and riders. Dr. Albright, a stooped man with a shock of white hair, arrived and unlocked his front door. Abigail's heart pounded against her ribs. She handed a small bundle of her remaining food, a piece of dried meat Kaelin had given her, to him. "If I am not back in half an hour," she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands, "take Leo and run. Go north into the mountains. Do not wait for me." Kaelin took the bundle, his fingers brushing hers. His gaze held hers for a long moment. "Be careful, Abigail." It was the first time he had used her name. She nodded, then pulled the shawl over her head, took a deep breath to steady her nerves, and stepped out of the shadows of the livery and into the morning sun, walking toward the lion's den. Every step was an act of will, every approaching rider a potential enemy. She was no longer running. She was hunting. The bell above the door to Dr. Albright's surgery tinkled softly, a sound from Abigail's childhood that now sounded like a death knell. The room smelled of carbolic acid, old paper, and dried herbs. Dr. Albright was at his desk, peering at a ledger through a pair of spectacles perched on the end of his nose. He looked up, his expression of professional welcome faltering into one of shock as he recognized her. "Abigail, good heavens, child. We heard the homestead burned. That Silas..." He trailed off, rising from his chair. "They said you were gone, too. We feared the worst." "I'm all right," Dr. Abigail said, keeping her voice as level as she could. She pulled the shawl tighter around herself. It was terrible. I barely got out, and the boy, little Leo, the doctor, asked, his eyes full of genuine concern. "He is safe," she said, offering a small, vague truth. "He is with a friend. I had to make sure he was secure before I came into town." Dr. Albright nodded, his brow furrowed with sympathy. Of course. "My dear girl, what can I do for you? You look like you've been through a war." This was the moment. Her story had to be flawless. Dr. Silas was a careful man. He was worried about Bartholomew Kane's interest in our land. He told me that if anything were to happen to him, he had left a packet for me, for safekeeping. He said he left it with the most trusted man he knew. He left it with you. The doctor's expression shifted from sympathy to confusion. He stroked his white beard thoughtfully. "A packet. For you, Silas was in here for his arm a few months back, but he mentioned nothing of the sort to me." Abigail's heart sank. Had Kaelin been wrong? Had they come all this way for nothing? Panic began to prickle at the edges of her composure. She had to push. "Please, doctor," she implored, allowing a note of genuine desperation into her voice. He was insistent. "He said you wouldn't know what it was, that he would have tucked it away somewhere in your office when you weren't looking. He said it was his insurance." His very words. A thick manila envelope. The word insurance seemed to jog the old man's memory. His eyes widened slightly. Insurance. Wait a moment. He walked over to a tall filing cabinet, one filled with patient records. He pulled open the bottom drawer, which was stuffed with old medical journals and thick, dusty tomes. He grunted with effort as he lifted a stack of them, and there at the very bottom was a thick manila envelope, just as she'd described. It had no name on it. "I'll be damned," Dr. Albright muttered, pulling it out. "I found this here about a month ago. I thought my delivery boy had misplaced it. Silas Cook, the sly fox." He handed the envelope to Abigail. "Here you are, my dear. I'm just glad I can help in some small way." Abigail's hands trembled as she took it. It was heavy, full of papers. "Thank you, doctor. You don't know what this means." She turned to leave, her heart soaring with a dangerous, premature victory. But as her hand touched the doorknob, the bell on the door jingled again. 2 men stepped inside, blocking the exit. One was a ranch hand she vaguely recognized. The other was Finn. Finn's cruel eyes swept the room, landing on Abigail. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. Well. Look what the cat dragged in. We've been looking all over for you, Mrs. Cook. Mr. Kane is mighty interested in seeing you again." Dr. Albright stepped forward, his bewilderment turning to outrage. "What is the meaning of this, Finn? You have no business barging into my surgery." Finn ignored him, his eyes fixed on the envelope in Abigail's hand. "And what's that you got there? Something your dead husband left you?" He took a menacing step forward. Mr. Kane would be interested in that too. Hand it over. Abigail's blood ran cold. They had been followed. Or perhaps it was just dumb luck. Either way, they were trapped. She clutched the envelope to her chest, backing away until she hit the doctor's examination table. "Get out of my office!" Dr. Albright demanded, his voice shaking with fury. Finn just laughed. He shoved the old doctor aside, sending him stumbling into his desk. "Stay out of this, old man." He advanced on Abigail, his hand outstretched. "The easy way or the hard way? Your choice." Suddenly the front window of the surgery exploded inward in a shower of glass. Kalen burst through the opening, a whirlwind of silent, focused fury. He had moved so quickly from the alley across the street that Finn and his man were caught completely by surprise. Before the second man could even draw his pistol, Kalen was on him. He moved not like a brawler, but like a predator. There was a swift, brutal economy to his movements. A blow to the throat, a twist of the arm, and the man went down, gagging and clutching a limb, bent at an unnatural angle. Finn, recovering from his shock, drew his revolver. "You damn savage," he roared, leveling the gun at Kalen's chest. Abigail reacted without thinking. She grabbed the heaviest object on the examination table, a thick glass jar full of cotton swabs, and swung it with all her might against the back of Finn's head. The jar shattered, and Finn grunted, staggering forward, his shot going wild and burying itself in the floorboards. The momentary distraction was all Kalen needed. He closed the distance in a single bound. He didn't go for the gun. He slammed the heel of his palm into Finn's nose with a sickening crunch. The foreman screamed, dropping his pistol and stumbling back, blood pouring down his face. Kalen followed up with a vicious kick to the man's knee, and Finn collapsed into a whimpering heap. The entire confrontation had taken less than 10 seconds. Kalen grabbed Abigail's arm. "Come, we have to go now." He pulled her towards the shattered window, but she resisted. She looked at the two men writhing on the floor, then at the terrified, astonished face of Dr. Albright. This wasn't the way. Running again wasn't the answer. "No," she said, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "No more running." She ripped open the manila envelope. Inside were letters from her own father to Kane, discussing the terms of Sarah's arranged marriage, and more damningly copies of bank drafts showing large payments from Kane to Silas Cook, starting just after Leo was born. It was all there. The motive, the blackmail, the proof. "Doctor," she said, her voice shaking but clear, "I need you to be a witness. These men work for Bartholomew Kane. He murdered my husband, and he tried to murder me and my son. This is the proof." She shoved a handful of the papers into the doctor's trembling hands. "You are a respected man. Take this to Marshal Thompson in Sterling Creek. Tell him everything." Kalen stared at her, a look of grudging admiration in his eyes. The sound of shouting came from the street. The commotion had drawn attention. They had moments. "Abigail, we must go." Kalen urged, his voice low and intense. "You go," she said, turning to him. "Take the baby. Flee north, just like we planned. Draw them away from the town. Give the marshal time to act on this." "I will not leave you," he stated, his jaw set. "You must," she insisted. "They want the child, and they want me. If we split up, we have a chance. You are the only one who can keep him safe in the mountains. I'll only slow you down. I'll hand myself over. I'll lead them on a chase, tell them the baby died in the fire. I'll buy you time. It's the only way to guarantee Leo survives. It was a desperate, suicidal gambit. But in her eyes, Kaelin saw the same fierce, sacrificial love that he had seen in Sarah's. The promise she had made to her sister was now a shield, and she was willing to place herself in the path of the killing blow to protect the child. It was a choice born not of fear, but of profound courage. Kaelin saw the desperate, suicidal logic in her plan. A single target was too easy for Kane's hunters to find. Divided, they had a chance. The old trapper's cabin on Sentinel Peak, he commanded, his voice, a low, urgent whisper. Follow the creek north. I will find you. It was not a promise to abandon her, but a promise to return, to. With a final shared look of grim understanding, he vaulted back through the shattered window and vanished into the alley's shadows. Abigail took a deep breath, dropped the remaining proof on Finn's chest, and walked out the front door with her hands raised in surrender. The days that followed were a test of will. Kane, enraged by the public confrontation, but believing his secret was safe, had her locked away. He questioned her relentlessly, his voice a silken threat. Where is the boy? Drawing on a reservoir of strength she never knew she possessed, Abigail gave a flawless performance of a broken, grieving mother. He's dead. She wept the tears real, even if the reason was not. He was in his cradle. The smoke was too thick. I couldn't get to him. Her story was convincing. A dead baby was a loose end tied neatly. Believing the primary threat to his reputation was buried in the ashes of the homestead, Kane grew careless. He didn't count on the fury of an old man whose sanctuary had been violated. Dr. Albright rode like a man possessed to Sterling Creek. Armed with the damning letters and the doctor's unimpeachable testimony, Marshal Thompson arrived 4 days later with a posse. Bartholomew Kane's empire of fear crumbled not with a gunfight, but with the quiet, authoritative click of handcuffs. Released into a town that now saw her as a courageous widow, Abigail slipped away that night. She walked for 2 days, her body aching, but her spirit resolved, following the winding creek into the mountains. A thin wisp of smoke from a derelict cabin guided her home. Kaelin was inside Leo, sleeping safely in his arms. The silent relief that passed between them was more potent than any words. They sat by the small fire, the silence heavy with unspoken truths. They were survivors bound forever by a ghost and the child she'd left behind. It's over, she finally said. Kane is arrested. Kaelin looked from his son to her, his dark eyes steady and clear. He is my son, but he carries your sister's blood. A child needs a family, not a father who must live in the shadows. The offer was plain, hanging in the fire-lit air. It was not a proposal of romance, but of something more profound, a partnership, a shared duty to the boy they both loved. Abigail looked at Leo's peaceful face, then at the strong, silent man who had appeared on her roof and saved them all. The West had taken everything from her, but it had left her with a purpose. The land is still ours, she said, her voice finding a new, unfamiliar strength. The water is still there. We could rebuild. It was not a vow of love, but something far more resilient, a foundation for a new beginning. And so, on the scorched earth of a murdered dream, 2 strangers began the impossible task of building a future. Abigail and Kaelin, a widow and a warrior, were bound not by vows, but by the legacy of a woman they both loved, and a child who carried the blood of 2 worlds. Theirs was not a story that would ever be told in the loud, boisterous saloons of the West. It was a quiet story of survival, of a promise kept, and of the strange and unexpected ways a family can be forged in the fire. They chose to honor the past, not by dwelling in its ashes, but by planting a new life in its place, a life for Leo. What do you think of their decision? Could a family like that truly survive in the unforgiving West? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by the story of Abigail's courage and Kaelin's determination, please give this video a like, share it with someone who loves a true Western drama, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales from the forgotten corners of American history.